Good afternoon, colleagues. This is meeting number 104 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for Tuesday, June 12th, 2018. We are here today in consideration of the message from the Auditor General of Canada that accompanied his 2018 spring report. I would remind all colleagues here today that we are televised, and so I would encourage you all to please put your phones on silent or vibrate so there's less distraction. We are honoured this afternoon to have Mr. Michael Wernick, Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary of the Cabinet with us, as it is somewhat unprecedented for the Auditor General to write such a message. It is also unprecedented for me to open this meeting with a few words of explanation as to why the committee has requested your presence here today, Mr. Wernick. Our focus is not primarily on the Phoenix pay system, nor is it with respect to the poor outcomes of Indigenous programs, although both are extremely important and are mentioned to great extent in his last audit. They will be subjects of future upcoming meetings. The objective of today's meeting, the objective of the Auditor General's message is, and I quote, to lead to a deeper understanding and correction of the pervasive cultural problems at play, end quote, within the public service. A culture that is created, in the Auditor General's opinion, and again quote, obedient public service that fears mistakes and risks. Its ability to convey hard truths has eroded, as has the willingness of senior levels, including ministers, to hear hard truths, end quote. A culture the Auditor General claims has caused and will continue to cause incomprehensible failures. It is this committee's sincere hope that this meeting today starts a process of change so that we do not experience any more incomprehensible failures. Failures that have adversely affected so many people, failures that could have and can be avoided in the future. So we welcome you, Mr. Wernick, and I turn to you for your testimony today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a statement or presentation or anything like that. If you indulge me, I might make just a few opening comments and then we could get right to your questions. I think the first thing I should get on the record is that as soon as I received your invitation, I accepted it within the hour, and I'm very pleased to be here. Second is I'm willing to stay here as long as you have questions. The last time I was before this committee, I was Deputy Minister at what was then Aboriginal Affairs, and I was here for 5 hours spread over 2 days. I think Mr. Christopherson might have been there. I reminded my colleagues behind me, I was there for 5 hours. No journalists attended, not one. So I'm actually pleased to have the opportunity to have an exchange with you on the record. This is National Public Service Week, and it's a great opportunity to engage with you, and through you, I hope, with Canadians about their public service. I just have a couple of opening comments. First one, I think, is very important to get across, and that is that Canadians out there should be very confident that they live under the rule of law in a healthy democracy, and that they are served by strong institutions of governance, independent courts, free elections, a vigorous legislature, officers of parliament, and a free press, and by a nonpartisan, values-driven public service that is very good at supporting democratically elected governments in delivering their agendas and in providing a very wide variety of services to Canadians. I consider it part of my job to engage Canadians in an ongoing conversation about their public service and to channel the stories of other public servants who do not have a voice. I have had the honour of submitting 3 annual reports to the Prime Minister that were tabled in Parliament about the state of Canada's public service, all of which were tabled in Parliament, and I've never been called to a parliamentary committee to be questioned about them. They've all been posted on the web, and they have provided a vehicle for an exchange with public servants and other Canadians. I am hidden in plain sight. I have a website, I have a social media presence, You can follow me. You can look up more than 40 speeches that I've given to a wide variety of audiences. I've tried to be very clear and candid about what I think, where we are as a public service, and where we can do better. So I only have a couple of opening comments, and then really the point would be to take your questions and have a dialogue. So the first is that Canadians should have confidence in the excellence of their public service. That is not just an opinion. I bring you evidence. The World Bank, which is not a radical institution, ranked 200 countries on the effectiveness of their governments, and Canada was in the 95th percentile, only a few small countries ahead of us. There was a think tank and a business school in the United Kingdom that tried to rank the effectiveness of public services and created an index of 12 different factors of the effectiveness of public service. Canada was #1 last year. The Global Government Forum took all of the G20 and all of the European Union countries and assessed them on the presence of women in leadership in public sector positions. Canada was #1. The World Wide Web Foundation, which tracks issues around the internet and new technology, ranked 115 countries on how their governments are engaging with their citizens on open data. Canada was #2 to the United Kingdom. Forbes magazine listed Canada's best employers in 2018, and 7 federal departments, including 2 of the largest, are on that list as best employers in Canada. One of the reasons that Canadian public service is strong is that there are many, many feedback loops on what we have done, what we could have and should have done better. And this committee is certainly an important part of that. And I would assert that we have a culture of learning from mistakes and constant striving to adapt to change and be better. Another is that the senior leadership of the public service is very capable and guided by strong values. My assertion to you is that the senior leadership community of the public service today is as good or better as any that has ever served this country, and I would argue better, because the job's just getting more and more complex and challenging. The second message to you is to urge you as a committee with great responsibility and influence to be very thoughtful in coming to a view about what should be done as we move forward. If you start from the wrong diagnosis and start applying harsh remedies and surgeries, you could cause very serious side effects, complications. You could even kill the patient. It has taken generations of work and effort to build the world-class public service that's envied around other countries and people come to Ottawa to emulate. It will take a lot of work to make it even better, but it could be very damaged quickly in a matter of a few years, and it could take a generation to bring it back. So I would ask you to weigh very seriously the evidence that you've heard and that you'll continue to hear, and engage Canadians on how we can have an even better public service to meet the challenges that go as we go forward. I'm willing to stay as long as you want. I have some expertise and experience in the accountabilities of deputy ministers, how they're chosen, their tenure, their turnover. I particularly welcome questions about the incentives and disincentives in which we operate. And I have some ideas for you on specific structural reforms that could be pursued in the future. My view on the Auditor General's chapter, and I have the enormous respect for Michael. We've met many times and had a lot of important conversations about his role and mine, and as I think you're aware, we came to an agreement to give him even more and unprecedented access to cabinet confidences in order to serve you as parliamentarians and Canadians. And when he's on the ground of sound audit methodologies with strong recommendations about what can and should be done, he's a great service to the country. But the Chapter 0 is an opinion piece, which I take issue with, and I'm happy to discuss. I believe it contains sweeping generalizations, it's not supported by the evidence, and it doesn't provide you any particular guidance on what to do to move forward. I also don't agree that the pay system was an incomprehensible failure. I think it's entirely comprehensible, it was avoidable, it's repairable, and it gives us all kinds of lessons about how to build a better public service. Avec ça, peut-être, Monsieur le Président, j'attends.
Chair, now, I'm happily waiting your response and your questions.
Mr. Wernick, We're now going to move into the first round of questioning. This is a 7-minute round. We're going to begin with the government side. Ms. Mendez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Wernick, de votre présence ici.
Thank you very much for being with us here today, Mr. Warnick, and for accepting our invitation so promptly. I'm also very grateful for that.
This opportunity to, as you mentioned, this is National Public Service Week, and to congratulate the Public Service of Canada for the excellent job they do in serving Canadians. I think we should never forget the important service they do provide, and how fortunate we are to have a public service that is so professional and so dedicated. That being said, and you've just opened, I think, the theme of this meeting. You say you disagree with the sweeping generalizations that the Auditor General made in his Chapter 0 or his message. We, as a committee, I think, and this was pretty much unanimous in the committee, were quite distressed, if you wish, to find that his analysis of what happened both with the Phoenix Space System and also with services to First Nations and Métis and Inuit communities had for him become almost the image of what went wrong, even if we had such a great series of checks and balances in our system. It's all there. So how could this happen? And I'd like to hear you, as you say you have your own views on the matter. I would like to hear you tell us how you would consider it avoidable, what wasn't done that could have been done to avoid such a failure.
Merci pour la question. I think there's several.
Thank you for your questions.
Not to go on too long. I don't understand the comparison to Indigenous policy. I just don't, and it's an area I worked in. The situation of Canada's Indigenous peoples is the result of generations of public policy and law and other factors. There are many sort of theories and explanations about how we got here and very different views about how we can move forward. It's not something that it's a policy failure, basically, and it's going to be a difficult one to move forward on. The Auditor General's predecessor, Madam Fraser, some of you will remember, tabled observations, a Chapter 0 on First Nations in the spring of 2009, and it's a very helpful piece on Indigenous policy. I commend it to you. It had 4 very specific prescriptions about what could be done to improve outcomes in government programming for First Nations. And I thought it was a solid contribution by the Auditor General to public debate, and it's something that I used a great deal in advising ministers at the Indigenous Affairs Department. So, I mean, I'm happy to pursue that, but that's a very big topic. I think that you can continue to pursue the explanations of what happened in the pay system. My view is it's comprehensible, and it's all there in the 2 reports from the Auditor General, in the Goss-Gilroy report, in the Gartner report. I think what has been, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, I think what he's trying to say is there's no single culprit or single explanation. And the people that are looking for simplicity to say, here's 2 or 3 people that we can blame, or here's the explanation. My take on the pay system is it was a perfect storm and confluence of all kinds of factors, which are laid out in the Auditor General's 2 chapters. And you can continue to pursue that line of inquiry. There have been many officials appearing at this committee, at the Government Operations Committee, at the Senate Finance Committee. It's perfectly legitimate to want to pursue the forensics of what happened and how did we get here. It's not actually, in my view, going to help that much in the urgent job of stabilizing the system and getting people paid on time accurately today. And it doesn't provide a lot of guidance on what to do going forward, other than the specific recommendations the Auditor General made on this topic, and particularly the report by Goss-Gilroy, which I think provides lots of lessons on project management.
And I think that's where actually we are more, as far as I understand, we're more interested in understanding what can be done to avoid a repetition of this, because it's the accountability at different levels that seems to have failed. Not necessarily, we understand the mechanics, I think, we've gotten there. It's the accountability issues that failed throughout that we are concerned about. And how do you see it improving going forward? How can we correct that?
I think that the language of the two Auditor General chapters does provide you some advice on that, and there were specific recommendations. There was clearly a breakdown in information flowing up to the accountable deputy head in that department for a period of time. And there was a breakdown in the oversight by Treasury Board, Secretariat, and some of the governance and the committees around it. I think there is a specific breakdown around the pay system, which can be repaired, and the Goss-Gilroy report in the Auditor General chapter points to ways of doing that. I think it is inaccurate to generalize that as a matter of culture across 300 different organizations. It's not even accurate to apply it to the Department of Public Services.
I think the Auditor General, from what I've been hearing in the very many meetings we've had with him, also was trying to come to the idea that outcomes for Canadians are really what we should be worried about, and how we deliver outcomes for Canadians, and how sometimes the preoccupation with process overcomes that objective, the objective of delivering services for Canadians. In this instance, services for the public service itself. It's their pay system, it's their salaries that are in question, and how we somehow fail to see it to a delivery that was the expected one of the success of this system. The fact that we separated two projects, that's another of his comments, that the project management itself and the IT tech transformation projects were not aligned, they were driven separately, that caused an issue too. How do you see your office overcoming these weaknesses that were identified?
Ms. Mendez.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, the quick answer is my role in this is to give the Prime Minister advice on who goes into Deputy Minister roles, and to give the Prime Minister advice on machinery of government, which is how decision-making processes can be organized, creation of cabinet committees, working groups, that sort of thing, and how departments can be structured. Successive governments have pulled apart and put together government departments and agencies in different combinations as they adapt to a changing world. There's a long history of that. The advice, those are Prime Minister prerogatives, and the advice on who to put in Deputy Minister roles comes from me, and I'm accountable for it or answerable for it. And the advice on machinery of government comes from me, from the Privy Council. After that, it is up to each minister to be answerable to Parliament, and each deputy minister to be answerable for their responsibilities as the accounting officer, which I know you've had time to talk about at this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick. We'll now move to Mr. McCauley, please. Mr. McCauley, you have 7 minutes.
Great, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Now, the AG goes over in his report what appears to be a very disturbing situation where it looks like the Department of Indigenous Services is skewing the graduation rate of Indigenous students. Now, of course, this data is being used to measure the success of the program, how much money should be spent, policy direction, etc. I'd like to know what your opinion is on this, and if we're taking the right corrective measures to address this. My understanding, this is not a new complaint from the AG about the graduation rates and other metrics of success, so to speak, from investment in Indigenous services.
I'll have to say I have no particular knowledge or expertise of the details of that methodology. I think the Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services would be the right person to ask that, so I could probably mess up an answer by venturing one. I would take the opportunity to build on the last question as well, which is it's very important which measures you choose to chase. Measuring what gets measured is what people do put their work and energy into it. So successive governments of different stripes have worked at identifying the goals of different departments and agencies. Every spring, you see the planning documents. They used to be called reports on plans and priorities. They're now called departmental plans. And there's an effort to set out specific objectives in specific areas. And every fall, you see performance reports, which are an attempt to measure as candidly as possible. And so the measure, I have no comment on what's the right way to measure First Nations education.
I understand that. It's not about the right way to measure it. It's, I'll quote from you, we found the department did not access relevant data it did collect to determine whether it was accurate and complete. So AGA is not saying we're setting the wrong goals. It appears they're purposely using the wrong information. He says not collecting the relevant data, not accessing the relevant data. And he goes on that we're poorly, and I agree with you, it's a failure of policy over the years serving our Indigenous people, but it's very clear throughout the report. It's not a complimentary one on the bureaucracy on serving the Indigenous people. Very clear they're not reporting correctly, they're not accessing the right data, almost like they're jigging the numbers to serve their own purposes.
I'm not sure what their purposes would be.
Well, it would be the same purposes the Phoenix executives were doing when they hid information to perhaps protect their jobs, help their own promotions. I'm not really sure. But I'm curious your opinion on the AG's comment about them accessing irrelevant data to come up with numbers that perhaps support their internal agenda, not supporting the Indigenous students.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. Schools on reserve are run by the First Nations with financial support from the Department of Indigenous Services. They have contribution agreements in which, in exchange for money from the department, they're asked to report on certain data. The data comes from the schools, and it flows to the department. This is a topic which has been discussed in previous Auditor General reports. Madam Fraser actually complained about the reporting burden on First Nations and how many reports they had to submit through funding agreements, and recommended statutory funding be the basis for funding First Nations education. Right. That's actually something I agree with, but that's something you as legislators can do.
Right. But anyone reading the AG's report on services to our Indigenous would certainly perhaps have a lack of trust in our system. Is this a concern, perhaps, that the public's going to have for other services and other numbers reported across by other departments?
No.
Do you believe that this is perhaps just an outlier in every other?
I think it's an example of a specific issue in a specific department, and we have the systems, including the Auditor General and other feedback loops of other officers of Parliament, parliamentary inquiry, and others, which surface these issues. They're detected and they're corrected, and you move on. I think to generalize it beyond that is tricky territory.
Do you think they have been corrected over the years?
I think government constantly improves over the years. Otherwise, why would I be able to recite those set of statistics that says we have the most effective public service on the planet?
I'm not doubting that we've got an effective public service, but do you think these issues over the years have been addressed and fixed?
Many have not. And one of the roles of this committee,
specifically.
Yes, there were over 10 Auditor General chapters over the years on that specific department. That specific department was a legal construct based on contribution agreements. And the men and women that go into that department did the best they could with outdated legislation and contribution agreements. And the path forward to do better on Indigenous services was pointed out by Sheila Fraser in the spring 2009 report, which is to have a lot of the programs on a statutory basis, to have strong local delivery and service organizations, to build the capacity in the communities. It's not through any lack of effort or competency.
What's your level of confidence that the issues identified in the AG's report on the Indigenous services delivery is going to be addressed?
I'm confident that they're being taken very seriously by the minister and the officials, and that if you ask them back a year from now, they'll be able to report on progress.
So you have confidence?
Right. Absolutely.
Let me ask you, just continuing on a bit about the public trust, do you have any concerns that there's other major projects across the government that are being given what we call the Phoenix treatment, perhaps a lack of transparency or perhaps not proper reporting, where we're going down the path of another Phoenix-type project?
You're asking me if I know about unknown unknowns. I mean, I think one of the things that I have trouble with the Auditor General's language is...
my question is, do you have concerns that perhaps this is existing in other departments?
I have no doubt that errors and mistakes will be made across the public service. We're over 300 organizations with 5,000 executives and 260,000 human beings coming in.
Are the levels of the issues that we had with Phoenix, where there seemed to be a real extreme lack of accountability to address the situation before it went off the cliff?
I'm not going to guarantee it will never happen, but I do have some confidence in the fact that we're here today, that with all of the multiple lines of accountability and oversight on government departments, these issues are surfaced, identified, and remedies are put forward, and in many cases they are corrected.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick. Mr. Macaulay, Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Chair.
7 minutes.
Hello. Thank you. How quickly they forget. First off, thank you very much for your attendance. Good to see you again. May I also echo your comments about the excellence of our public servants. I've served at all three orders of government and have said over those 30 years ago how blessed we are. At that time at the city level, and now my experience at the provincial level, the federal level, we are truly blessed as a country in the caliber of citizens that decide to put their professional careers and their abilities and their passion into making Canada a better place. We are so blessed. And I say that all across the country, and I say it internationally, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. And where there are problems, in the main, it is not those individuals that are the problem. It's the systems and the procedures that the rest of us and the senior management have imposed on them. So I think that's a great place for us to all start and agree that individually we are so lucky as Canadians in terms of the people that choose to be in our public service at all three orders of government. Secondly, I feel the need to nitpick a little bit. You talked about how you recently, leaving the impression, graciously offered new information to the Auditor General. And, I mean, given the fact that the federal legislation is absolutely clear that the Auditor General is entitled to anything they want, it reminds me of big corporations that brag to their new employees about all the benefits they're going to get, neglecting to mention the fact that it was the union that actually fought for those rights and sometimes had to strike for them, but the company then takes the credit for saying, here's all these wonderful things that we give you. So I just want to mention that if anybody's giving anything, it's the Auditor General respecting sort of the niceties of how decision-making is made at the cabinet level, but at the end of the day, the Auditor General of Canada is entitled to whatever information the Auditor General of Canada wants. And that's what the legislation says. Now, to the crux of it, I was so hoping this wasn't going to happen. What you said today, sir, is like my worst nightmare come true since I read this message from the Auditor General. Because, to me, when I read this, my jaw was on the floor. And I think there's a number of colleagues who would say they felt the same way. It's like, wow. And it was the opposite of what you're saying, Mr. Wernick. You're talking about how this is a one-off. And the Auditor General goes on this whole message. This is a message from the Auditor General, not just a chapter, a formal message from our Auditor General, the taxpayers' and citizens' best friend on Parliament Hill, to Parliament. And what it says is, we've got a massive cultural crisis. So when I listen to your remarks today, with all due respect, one of two things, colleagues, I say this to my colleagues. Either we have a deputy of the Privy Council who has his head buried in the sand and is in complete denial with what the cultural problems are, or we've got an Auditor General that's off the rails. But there's not a lot of gray area here. There's not a lot of nuance. What you're saying today, Mr. Wernick, is almost the opposite of what the Auditor General has said about what the problem is, what the solutions are, and what the observations are. So, where does that leave us? Because I thought we were going to have a clerk that was going to come in and say, we agree, and we appreciate the focus on the problem, and we want to be part of the solution. And we want to work with you, public accounts, to be a part of that solution, and all of us working together. And then I was trying to think, well, how do we do this? It's brand new. It's kind of exciting. But, you know, it's like really serious. And we've never done this, not since my time. So how are we going to do it? And instead, we're like at below zero. And don't ever refer to an Auditor General's report as zero, please. We are in deep trouble right now because the Auditor General, whose sole mandate, and remember they're an agent of Parliament, their sole mandate is to make sure that Canadian taxpayers' money is well spent and they're getting the services that they deserve and are entitled to. And we've got a clerk of the Privy Council who's coming in and basically saying, no big problem. No, it's not that at all. I disagree with the Auditor General. This is just another one-off problem, and we'll work on it and we'll fix it. Well, that's not where we are. And I think, Chair, all I can say to you is that it seems to me we as a committee at some point pretty quick need to decide, where are we? Do we agree that the Auditor General is off the rails? Or do we agree that we have a huge problem made even more difficult by the top of the bureaucracy not accepting there's a problem? Now, like most things in life, I suspect somewhere in there is where we need to be. People know how I feel about the Auditor General and where I will likely be when we have those discussions in private or public. But I'm fair-minded. I like to think I'm fair-minded. I'm open-minded. I'm angry, but I'm open-minded about the process. But it seems to me, Chair, at some point we need to find a way so that we can decide where are we on these two extreme positions. Do we support the Auditor General or do we support the Clerk of the Privy Council? Their positions do not line up. And it seems to me until we decide that, we can't decide what course of action, because believing one takes you down one road, believing the other one takes you down another road, and we could have the committee flying all over the place and being totally ineffective, which then is us not doing our job and us letting our culture fail us. So those are my thoughts, Chair, and I'll leave it at that to hear what my esteemed colleagues think.
Unfortunately, our time is just up. You got 10 seconds left. We're going to go back. Maybe you've given us some things to think about here, and some of the comments maybe that Mr. Warnick would have are going to have to be in someone else's time.
To respond to some
and we will come to Mr. Massey, and then you can work in whatever you so choose as the time goes on. Mr. Massey, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Warnick, for being with us this afternoon. It's greatly appreciated, and it's important to hear what you have to say. As my colleague Ms. Mendez said, we appreciate that you accepted our invitation quickly. But first, I'd like to react with what my colleague Mr. Christofferson just said. After 17 years within the federal public services at various departments, I can tell you personally that I have seen the work of many public servants who work so hard and who are very committed, determined, and who offer services that are important to Canadians throughout the country. And we have so many examples of public service successes. I'm thinking about the pension centre in Shediac, which was modernized in recent years, and this was done with great success. I'm also thinking about the documentary imagery centre, which was developed with committed public servants who are there to serve Canadians, and other departments as well. I'm also thinking more recently about the 40,000 Syrian refugees that we welcomed here in Canada. And thanks to the departments and public servants, their work, who worked behind the scenes so hard on the mandate we gave them. However, I'm also I was surprised to see the AG's report and his message that he sent. And this message is important. It shocked us. It has also upset executives at the Federal Public Service. They were shocked. And the Auditor General is not the only one who has mentioned that there are challenges, obviously. Everything's not black or white. There's a gray area in the middle. Something has to change in the public service, that's clear. There's some 60,000 public servants, 200,000 public servants, rather. Everything's not perfect, though. But I'd just like to underscore, I read a text by Donald Savoy that you all probably know. I'd like to hear what you have to say about these comments. And I'm going to read it in English because I only have the document in English.
Controlling center. It has lost its way and ability to manage. They have learned the art of delegating up rather than down to the frontline workers as they did in the 70s and 80s to get things done. Donc, j'aimerais vous entendre sur...
I'd like to hear what you have to say about the ways we can address some of these challenges within the public service and possible solutions. Everything's not black or white. There's a gray area in the middle, and you've written an annual report, which is generally positive, but I know you were able to look at some of the challenges that we could improve, and I'd like to know what you have to say about that. Thank you very much for your question. I have a few comments, quick ones to make because we don't have much time left, but I'm not saying that the public service is perfect. There are errors and serious errors from time to time that occur. We're human, so there will be errors. But we do have a culture of learning, and there's a tremendous amount of feedback. And I would like to mention the table I presented to the clerk.
Many layers of oversight and feedback on the senior public service, lines of accountability and feedback, all of which are in an engineering sense a negative feedback loop, what you did wrong, what you could have done better. There are almost no positive feedback loops other than performance pay and promotion within which senior public servants operate. So I think you have to look very deeply at the incentive structure, which is the one in which human beings act, and culture is shaped by incentives and disincentives. And there are opportunities to create incentives and disincentives which reward innovation, creativity, or that stifle it. And that's a big topic, and I'm happy to exchange with you. I think the importance of my report is it is a very rare opportunity to talk about the successes and the accomplishments. And I've never been asked to a parliamentary committee to talk about 3 annual reports on the state of the public service. I've never been asked a question about the innovation fair, which showcases all the examples where if you let loose people and ask them to come forward. I've never been asked a question about the impact challenge or the prize challenges that we're trying to develop solutions by working with outside partners. I could go on and on and on about those because your attention as parliamentarians, quite reasonably, is drawn to all of the feedback loops from almost a dozen institutions which are there simply to look very closely at particular issues and point out what could have and should have done better. I'm not complaining about that. I think that is the explanation for why we are as good as we are. I think the difference, just to jump to Mr. Christopherson's question, and by the way, it's the Auditor General that calls his opinion pieces Chapter 0, is that to make sweeping generalizations about the culture across 300 different organizations and all of their subunits spread across 10 provinces, 3 territories, and 100 different countries, none of those generalizations will stand up to scrutiny. And I bring you evidence. I bring you 3 annual reports full of stories showcasing the accomplishments and the successes of public servants. And I bring you those 6 indicators which tell you. If you want to ask somebody who knows organizations, I can give you another witness to suggest. The global managing partner of McKinsey, who's looked at every big, top, high-performing private sector company in the world, is a Canadian, Dominic Barton. He's worked for Stephen Harper as part of his advisory committee on the public service, and he's worked for Prime Minister Trudeau as chair of the Growth Council. Ask him what he thinks about the public service of Canada.
Merci, Mr. Warnick. Il me reste une minute.
Thank you, Mr. Warnick. I'd like to discuss your report because it's an important document, and it says that most public servants do look at this report. They read it carefully, and there's something that I noted that's quite important on page 33 of your report. You say that 43% of public servants say that their work is undermined because there's too many approval stages. On this topic, because you mentioned earlier that you would like to be able to give your opinion on potential measures or funds that could be created, I'd like to hear what you have to. How do we trim the approval processes within public service? First thing, these processes are there to protect public funds. It's a form of insurance to make sure everything goes correctly. There are several levels of verification that are in the public interest. It's a balance between this diligence and innovation and creativity. We have to find this balance.
That you can read about 30 speeches I've given on that subject. A lot of this is what we do to ourselves, public servant on public servant, about creating rules and processes. I think that the public service is ripe for a deep structural reform in the coming years to delayer it and debureaucratize it. We've made some progress, but I think there's a lot more that could be done.
Thank you, Mr. Warnick. We'll now move to the second round to Ms. Raitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Warnick. Really nice to see you. As I look around the table, I see that I'm probably the only one that you've worked with in the past around the cabinet table, so I may be coming at this from a different perspective. I'm glad you mentioned your speeches. I was taking a look at one you gave to the ADMs on April 11 that caught my attention, and in it you talked about the future, and I think that's fair enough. We know what's happened in the past. What are we going to do going forward in the pay system? And you said that you're going to take all of what is emerging in disruptive technology, rethinking technology project management, procurement, and applying it to getting us a pay system that works. That will be one of the signature projects of the next few years. And that, to me, means we really have to understand what happened in this payroll system, and specifically at the very end of the decision-making with respect to when it launched. The Auditor General does say that part of the reason why he wrote this message was to explore the cause of the failures. One part of the cause of the failures that I don't see anything about is the one that I want to discuss with you, knowing that we both had experience around the cabinet table. Now, Mr. Warnick, you became the clerk of the Privy Council on January 20th, is my understanding.
22nd, roughly, yeah.
January 20th. So you were the clerk prior to the implementation of the Phoenix payroll system, which happened on February 24th, 2016. Right. So, Mr. Warnick, you would have been around the cabinet tables. You would have went to the deputy minister's breakfasts. You would have been part of the committees that were overlooking it. So you were really there, and you were the link from what was being told to you by your deputy ministers and the cabinet and the prime minister, because as is stated on your website, you are not only the head of the federal public service, you are the secretary to the cabinet, and you're the deputy minister to the prime minister. So having read everything the Auditor General reported on, the facts of how the process unfolded, at any point did you inform the cabinet or the prime minister about the difficulties on decision-making on going ahead with the Phoenix implementation?
I'm trying to get the chronology right. The new government was sworn in on November 4th. I don't believe that the pay system was discussed at any cabinet meetings in the period prior to launch. It may have been discussed at Treasury Board ministers. I'd have to get back to you on that. So no, I didn't have any conversations. I was relying on the assurances from the deputy committee that was overseeing the project, and I think I was on the job getting ready for the first budget of the new government and other issues around the time So I accept entirely that Phoenix was launched on my watch.
Yeah. So the federal cabinet actually had a retreat in St. Andrews, New Brunswick during that time when the decisions were being made around the Phoenix payroll system. Do you know whether or not this was an issue that was brought up? Of course, Madame Charette was the clerk at the time, but you were the deputy clerk. You were the second in command. Do you have any knowledge about whether or not in those 36 hours of deliberations talking about delivering to Canadians, did the cabinet have a briefing on the Phoenix payroll system?
Not the full cabinet. That would have been considered an issue for the Treasury Board Committee ministers.
Do you know if the Treasury Board Committee ministers received a briefing on this?
I don't know.
Because it could be the reason why the Treasury Board decided to get independent advice on whether or not the system was actually ready to go. But I guess we'd have to ask the Treasury Board ministers about that. Mr. Warnick, was this decision for implementation of the Phoenix payroll system a delegated power from the Minister of Public Works? Do you know?
I don't know if it was formally legally delegated. It was a matter, I think, that was the prerogative of the deputy ministers that were involved. One would have been the Treasury Board as the employer, and the other would be Public Services, I think, as it was called by then, as the project manager and deliverer of the service.
Because what's interesting to me is, for those of you who've not been a minister before, you receive a pretty lengthy document at the beginning when you meet with your deputy at the first, and in it are all the things that you agree that as minister you're not going to have a decision over. Because absent that, as the minister, you actually are responsible for every single decision that every single official within the public sector makes in your portfolio. Do you have the same kind of delegated power with respect to deputy ministers? Are there certain things that, as the head of the federal public service, you let the deputy make the decision on only?
No, because I have no executive authority over deputy ministers. None. Zero.
Is there anything that you wouldn't tell the Prime Minister in terms of having the Prime Minister in a position to make a decision to ensure oversight? And here's my problem with all of this. 14 deputy ministers decided in late January that the Phoenix payroll system was not ready to go, and they brought it to someone and somewhere.
Mr. Massé, on a point of order.
Because the clerk of the Privy Council is with us. We had agreed that we would focus our intervention on the chapter, the general message by the Auditor General. So we're going to have an opportunity to discuss about the Phoenix report. So if you may.
So I agree, and that's why in my opening comment I said it's not specifically on Phoenix, it's not specifically on Indigenous. I think what Ms. Raitt is driving at is the culture of information being passed on, and she's using the Phoenix as a example of that. And maybe Ms. Raitt, just as a suggestion, driving down to the culture, you can even refer to the culture, but a point taken, not necessarily a point of order. There, as you know, there is a lot of latitude given.
I use it more as illustrative in terms of how the decision making happened in a concrete kind of way, because my concern not only isn't about within the public service. I mean, the mantra of the federal public service is to fearlessly advise and to faithfully implement, and I want to make sure that there was fearless advice given to the decision makers in that cabinet room. And that's why I was asking Mr. Wernick those kinds of questions around what kinds of processes were in place, because for me to know that 14 deputy ministers, 14 potential ministers should have known that there is a problem, because it's taking a stance against Treasury Board is a pretty bold thing to do in a government, having been on the wrong side of Treasury Board on a few issues. And I'm just curious to know, when you get to that stalemate, what do you do, and how do we prevent that stalemate from happening again? What are the assurances that when we go on this brand new program that's going to be even more complex, that we get it right?
Thank you, Ms. Raitt. Mr. Warnick.
Very quickly, I don't think there is a stalemate. I think I commend to you the document Open and Accountable Government, which is the software of Westminster government and the roles of ministers, deputy heads, and elsewhere. There was a version that Prime Minister Harper issued at the beginning of his government that you'd be familiar with. It was revised in some areas and it reissued by Prime Minister Trudeau at the beginning of his government. That is the playbook, and it makes very clear the roles. I think you may have formed an impression from the Auditor General's chapter, because he alludes to this sort of in a sideways way, that officials should have spoken up at certain intervals and asked for more resources. Well, you'd be aware there is no way for officials to ask for resources. There isn't. You go to Treasury Board with a submission signed by a minister, and if a minister will not sign a request for resources, it doesn't happen. If a minister will not make a request to the Minister of Finance for a budget submission, it won't happen. There is no channel by which senior officials can ask for resources.
Do you think that is is that something that maybe in the culture of, given the acceptable culture, is that acceptable?
Well, there are different models, but I think ours rests on ministerial answerability for resources. Ministers request resources at Treasury Board, and Treasury Board ministers grant them. Granted on the advice of ministers, and parliamentarians supply and appropriations.
Thank you, Mr. Warnick. Mr. Lefebvre, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On that point, with respect to resources, again, the idea today was to talk about the culture, and I had more questions, but just to start off, can you give us a bit of the timeline that you're aware of when 700 or more professional payroll individuals were let go? Do you know what the timelines were? Were that in 2014, 2015?
I think that's all set out in the chronology in the Auditor General's chapter, so I would probably get it wrong by at least a few months, but the project envisaged centralization in the pay center, and it envisaged a high degree of automation, and so there was an anticipation that there would be reduced staffing levels at the end of the project implementation. So they were starting to disappear on us. They were an older community to start with. Many of them did not want to move to Miramichi and accept employment there. So I think what's not really caught in context in the chronology is we were kind of between two canoes, between a system which wasn't very good and the people were leaving, and jumping into the canoe of the new system, which obviously did not go well. But there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to pause and delay because the pay clerks were basically disappearing.
So when the decision was made to go and to get the pay system going, was there any advice ever given to the minister that at no point there's nothing to go back to? Basically, having let go of 700 payroll professionals, the other system does not exist anymore. We don't have anybody to manage it. Now we need to be going into this new system.
Well, I think that goes to Ms. Rait's question. I don't know what specific advice was given to Treasury Board ministers. This was never seen as a matter for full cabinet. It was a project being supervised by Treasury Board ministers. You could ask former Treasury Board ministers and secretaries what advice they were given at different times. The Auditor General had access to all of that advice, and set out as best he could the chronology as he understood it. So I think it's important to remind people from time to time, there's absolutely no comfort in this, that there was an Auditor General chapter on the pay system around 2008 that said it was falling apart around our ears, and it was a matter of great urgency to replace it. So it's understandable that the government of the day took on a pay modernization project.
I guess what I'm asking is that, was there a system to be going back to?
There was no system, period. It was cardboard cards and manual record keeping, and it was a world in which people waited months when they moved from department to department to have their pay cut. Almost everything that you've seen under the Phoenix label happened in the pre-Phoenix world. It was a terrible, terrible pay environment, and there was no system, and it was a reasonable thing by the previous government to do, and it was the advice of senior public servants to get a 21st century pay system in place. Obviously, we failed to do it.
Thank you. Now, with respect to our experience here at the Public Accounts Committee, with respect to transformational technology, we had some challenges. Certainly, Phoenix, as you mentioned, was one. Shared services as well is something else that we've noticed that has had its challenges, and that has come up quite a few times now. That when we're changing technology here, it's as if the system is not geared for that. And actually, we had the Deputy Minister of the Treasury Board a few months ago, and I had asked her that question, whether we had the capacity or if that was a main challenge within the public service when it comes to transformational technology. and she agreed that that was a major challenge that we had. So, what is your response to that?
That's a big topic. Quick comments, and I'm happy to come back on this if you want. Big IT projects have high risk in the private sector, in universities and elsewhere. They're hard. Hard things are hard, as they say. The current government has tried to apply the lessons from Goss-Gilroy right away and to make some strides on that. You will see in the Budget Implementation Act, which is days away from being passed, stronger legal authorities for the Chief Information Officer at the Treasury Board to direct departments and impose standards and to have a real teeth in the role instead of just an advisory role. I think that's a very positive development. We established, out of some funding from the last budget, the Canadian Digital Service. Minister Bryson is a great champion of a migration to digital services, and there are many stories I could tell you about progress on that. I think, if I can just say on the Phoenix thing, this is where I do agree with the Auditor General's first report, which is there isn't really any option of restarting. We have to move forward. And if we don't deal with the underlying complexity of the classification system and the thousands of payrolls, and we just go back to the same vendor community, we will get the same answer.
Now, with respect to your annual report, I welcome your comment that you've made this report and that no committee has asked you to appear. And certainly I will suggest that this committee ask you to appear maybe on an annual basis to look at the report, but given the fact that we deal with deputy ministers all the time. That is, after the Auditor General's reports, we call in the deputy ministers and we ask them why their recommendations are basically why this the management system had not been perfect in certain situations. So I will make sure, Mr. Chair, that we ask the Clerk of the Privy Council to appear before us and to show us his report so we can ask questions on the public service and how we can improve it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lefebvre. We will discuss that at a later date. And we'll come back to Mr. McCauley, please.
Thanks. I just want to get back to what I was alluding to earlier about public trust and the confidence that Canadians, public servants, can have about other major programs going on within the government. And has there been any discussions about project audits or changes of how we're doing things to prevent another Phoenix issue?
I think I can say yes. Project management is a very specific skill. It's teachable and it's credentiable, if that's a word. And we have been putting a great deal of effort, led by the Comptroller General shop at the Treasury Board, in building project management capacities in the public service.
Have there been changes since all of the Phoenix thing blew up?
Yes.
Can you give us quick details of that?
Well, I can give you an example.
What projects you might be looking at?
I can rattle off a few examples. It's probably a question to put Secretary of the Treasury Board about specific projects that come across their transom. I have a role in personnel, and I recommended to the Prime Minister that the Comptroller General, who has real depth and expertise in costing and project management, go to the Department of National Defense, because they were getting a whack of money in the new defense policy, and he's now very involved in the implementation of the defense policy, sitting in the Defense Department. I think that's an example of how things
who
move
is that
forward.
Exactly when you say sitting in the Defense Department?
Bill Matthews is the senior associate, and he came directly out of the role of Comptroller General of Canada and knows a lot about costing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this leads to my next question, and we've been asking repeatedly. The Parliamentary Budget Officer put out a report last year on the cost of the combat surface vessels, about $60 billion. One of the issues he had with it, despite being, granted the powers in the Parliamentary Act to access the RFP and other costings, the bureaucrats blocked the PBO from actually accessing this information, to the point he had to actually go to the States to access American costs to bring back here to extrapolate. We've brought up repeatedly, again, here we have perhaps a Phoenix case of a bureaucrat ignoring the rules, blocking the PBO from actually delivering a proper study on what could eventually be an $80 billion project. Is this something that might be of concern to you? What we've seen in the past with Phoenix, the bureaucrats blocking information to ministers, now they're blocking the PBO.
Well, I think that gives me a chance to point out the multiple lines of oversight. The Auditor General of Canada and the Parliamentary Budget Office are often crossing into each other's swim lanes. We also have the Commissioner of Official Languages, the Privacy Commissioner, the Information Commissioner, the Commissioner of Lobbying, the Integrity Commissioner, the Commissioner of Ethics.
Let him finish, yep.
If I could,
Yep, can
there
carry
are
on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 officers of Parliament constantly asking for information, analysis, and research. We thought that there was duplication and overlap between the Parliamentary Budget Officer and the Auditor General, and that has been clarified, and you will have seen that the Budget Act from last year put the Parliamentary Budget Officer on a statutory basis for the first time in its existence. It used to be a creature of the Library of Parliament. Now it is independent, it has statutory authorities, it will be costing political platforms next year, and so on. So actually we have strengthened the role of the Parliamentary Budget Officer.
And I'm not criticizing that. I'm glad the government strengthened that. My specific question is, you know, we've seen with the Phoenix issue, I've read through it for 2.5 years, where we constantly have bureaucrats either blocking information to the minister, not serving public servants or taxpayers or government well. I'm asking about oversight for other major projects. Here we have one, $60 to $80 billion. Parliamentary Budget Officer, who has a right to access that, is being stymied not by the minister, but by bureaucrats. Perhaps the same type of bureaucrats who were not truthful, forthcoming on Phoenix issues. I'm wondering, is this an issue, a culture issue we have within our public service? Is this a rogue issue? Is this a concern that here we have a very large project dwarfing Phoenix cost-wise, where we have a bureaucrat denying the public or the Parliamentary Budget Officer access to something? And it goes to public trust and trust as parliamentarians in our system when they can't access what should rightfully be theirs.
Macaulay, Mr. Warnick.
I have no specific information on that case. I think there is room for legitimate debate and discussion with the officers in Parliament on their questions and the way in which data and information is presented and packaged. They're often asking for analysis and research, not just data. And I would take this opportunity to say the Auditor General does not have unconditional access to anything he or she asks for. The Supreme Court was very clear on that. Cabinet confidence matters, and part of my job is to defend Cabinet confidence.
For the Parliamentary Budget Officer, not the Auditor General, though.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Macaulay. We'll now go to Mr. Chen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also want to acknowledge that it is National Public Service Week, and truly I agree with the sentiment that's been shared around the table today that our public service does incredible work, and certainly we are here to look at ways in which we can improve and do better. I've heard Mr. Wernick take issue to the Auditor General's Chapter 0, specifically not agreeing with the sweeping generalizations, as he put it. I read through Chapter 0 and tried to focus on what the Auditor General explained as the incomprehensible failure. And he talked about that his work was able to determine what happened, how it happened, but his audit could not explain why it happened. And he speaks about the culture. Specifically, the Auditor General writes, organizational culture is often talked about, but it is difficult to define or measure, so it needs to be described. He goes on to say that, I want it to be clear that the current government did not create this culture, it inherited it, but it now has an opportunity to shape it for the better. Mr. Wernick, you spoke about the fact that there needs to be profound structural reforms in the public service moving forward. Can you describe and explain what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me just take a little bit of issue with the way you frame the question. I don't want to get drawn into a partisan debate about, well, you broke the public service. No, you broke the public service. My message to you is the public service is not broken. It's healthy, and it is learning, and it is getting better, and we learn the lessons and we move forward. So I warned the Auditor General that his report could be weaponized and turned into partisan politics, and I think I've been proven right on that. The issue that nobody really wants you to talk about is the underlying human resource system. We have 79 classification ladders. We have 650 distinct classification groups. We have thousands of special pay rules and allowances. And it would be very, very challenging to build a pay system that can cope with all of that at a level of excellence. And I think I would not be lured into spending a lot more time and energy on forensics of what happened unless it's going to inform a way forward. And my advice to you is we have to do some structural reform on the public service. There are too many layers. I joined the public service 37 years ago, and I have climbed 15 layers to get to the job I have now. I'm very proud of that. But I'm dismayed there were 15 layers. There should have been fewer. I don't think we need 5 layers of executives. I don't think we need all of the layers and complexity in the underlying HR system. If we're going to be nimble and fast and move people from place to place, from task to task, from work to work, we're going to have a 21st century human resource system underneath that. But that's something the unions have a veto on because most of that is collective bargaining territory. So it's going to be a big challenge to change that.
So if I hear you correctly, the complexity of the current HR system, the fact that there are multiple layers of bureaucracy makes it not possible to implement a pay system that would be able to
I wouldn't say not possible. It just makes it a lot more challenging. There are a lot of special pay rules, special allowances. People are getting promoted, and have to be given back pay because we have a lot of narrow bands of classification and so on. It's not a panacea. It's not the only issue. There are technology issues. There are vendor performance issues. There's oversight issues. There's lots of things that would contribute to a better pay system, and Ms. Raitt alluded to that. If we go back with the same HR rules to the same vendor community, we're not going to get a high-performing pay system. We'll get an adequate one.
So that understanding was there, and I'm trying to tie it back because the Auditor General talks a lot about the need to change culture. Do you believe that in recognition of what you've just said, would the culture have enabled the staff involved, the people who work in the system, the people who are part of these different layers of bureaucracy to be able to articulate in an impactful way that such a pay system would be very challenging to implement, given the circumstances under which they operate?
Thank you, Mr. Chen.
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, I have said publicly many, many times we are too bureaucratic and we need to be streamlined, simplified, and more agile, and their approaches to getting there that would make us more effective, because the pace of change out there in the economy and society and the world is such that we just have to be able to move more quickly to offer solutions to governments and to improve the kind of services that we deliver. That's an ongoing challenge. I do take issue with a generalization of a cultural problem. The very same department, Public Works, Public Services, delivered the Parliamentary Precinct project over 10 years, 20 different construction projects. You're about to move to the West Block and other facilities. All of those projects were on budget, on time, and fully functional. And it's the same ministers, the same deputy ministers, and the same department. So the generalization doesn't even hold up for the whole department. Certainly don't think it holds up for the entire public service.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick. We'll now move to Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad you had an opportunity to respond. It's not meant to be a kangaroo court. It's meant to be an opportunity to exchange ideas and thinking. But since we're doing a little nitpicking back and forth, I would just say in terms of that court decision, no Auditor General has ever asked for Cabinet confidences. They have no interest in what staff recommend to Cabinet. It's not their business. It's not what they do. They don't care. The problem has been that information, though, that the Auditor General is entitled to, such as have the staff done the proper work to make sure that the minister was informed to make the right kind of advice to Cabinet, was that done, has been often swept in under Cabinet confidences by different governments that didn't want to release the information, and so that we get into these tug-of-wars. But in terms of the actual raw information that the Auditor General wants, they are entitled to that, and they don't want the political stuff. They do everything they can to stay away from it. Second, on Chapter 0, sounds like I'm wrong. I stand corrected and I apologize. It also proves that Michael is no politician. Let me also now move to a couple of comments really to reaffirm what I've said earlier and my conclusion in terms of where I think we're going or not going. From the report, quote, as I said earlier, the bottom line is that the culture has to change. I don't have a set of instructions to fix a broken government culture, but I know the first step has to be to describe the current culture, which I have attempted to do, although I may not have captured everything. The second step is to admit that the cultural problem is real and that it urgently needs to be fixed. How to fix it will be up to the government and the public service. The silver lining is that while there is a cultural problem, the recent public service survey shows that the average public servant wants the culture to change and wants to work in a culture that focuses on results for people, end quote. Next. The reason I'm so disappointed in the direction that this discussion is taking today is that we have a perfect opportunity to do this in a climate where there is no weaponization or politicization of this document. The whole idea is that the Auditor General said, look, this has been going on for decades. This is not the result of the Harper government and we're going to go after them and demonize them some more, or the current government, we're going to do everything we can to take down the current Prime Minister to replace them in the next election. The Auditor General is saying this has been going on for decades. And if you want to place blame, there's blame to go around for everybody. And as one of the parties who's never been in power, I tell you I'm not interested in blame. We do that in the House of Commons during question period and a whole lot of other places. Not here. Not here, colleagues. So, I want to just a couple of lines again from the Auditor General report, since again the clerk has a different view than the Auditor General. From the report, quote, I am not assigning political blame. Let me just say what a great opportunity for us. Nobody is saying this is about partisan politics. It's about the culture. What a great opportunity. Nobody needs to feel defensive, colleagues. I am not assigning political blame, but my view is that both governments had opportunities to prevent the incomprehensible failure that Phoenix became. A standard lesson learned exercise won't prevent future incomprehensible failures. Phoenix is a defining moment, a wake-up call that goes well beyond lessons learned. It needs to lead to a deeper understanding and correction of the pervasive cultural problems at play. What follows is my description of the culture in the federal government, a culture that has evolved with each passing decade. I want to be clear that the current government did not create this culture, it inherited it. But now it has an opportunity to shape it for the better, end quote. And the last thing I want to say, Chair, with a little indulgence, 30 seconds, is we need the media, mainstream and social media, to jump on this and make it the issue that it is. I know the Phoenix thing gets all the headlines. It's nice and easy, and it's the politics, and it's sexy, and I get all of that. But this is what's underlying causing Phoenix. And if we don't see this as a focal point, it's going to go on and on and on, and basically this will get swept under the rug. And that's where we are right now. Either this becomes an issue that we care about, and I got to tell you, I think we need some outside pressure here, that somebody in the media, those that have access, have got to focus on this and say, hey, this is a big deal. Please take this unique opportunity where there's no political blame to fix it. And we're the ones that should be providing the leadership to do that. Chair, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And just in respect to that, I'm going to take a little bit of the chair's prerogative. One of the issues around having a meeting like this today is that all of a sudden, in our office, we've been getting letters from people in the public service. And this one here was sent to me in advance of Mr. Wernick's appearance at PACP today. I want to send you some thoughts on the culture of the public service that could have led to this Phoenix disaster. I work at such and such a ministry and have been there for quite a few years. I won't give you the years or where he works. I had the pleasure of serving as an advisor to the deputy minister for one of those years, in my time in that office, I was profoundly disappointed to see how priorities were set. In short, the only concern to be satisfying the mandate letter commitments of the minister. He goes on and just lists other things. Having seen this up close and personal, I was entirely unsurprised by everything I read in the Auditor General's report. If MPs really want to tackle the broken culture of the public service, they could begin by demanding those responsible for Phoenix mess to be held to account. As it stands, no one is ever held responsible for the screw-ups. People are simply shuffled into different positions, and there is part of the culture. I think the Auditor General also mentioned that some of these deputy ministers are here for a year or two and then shuffled off to another department, and that's part of, I think, what he says is the problem. He says in this culture for a public servant, it is often better to do nothing than to do something that doesn't work out. The fear of risk. Is that part of the culture? These are just things that we're getting letters from the public servants saying this culture needs to be fixed. Lisa, or Ms. Wraith, I'm sorry.
You're allowed to call me Lisa, Mr. Chair. That's okay. Picking up on Mr. Christopherson and on the chair itself, you know, if it was an isolated incident where it's only the Auditor General pointing to the culture issue, then I can accept the fact that it has no evidence. But we do have another individual, and that was the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, Mr. Joe Friday, who, when he testified a year and a bit ago, to the Government Operations Committee, this is what he said. He said, there cannot be an effective whistleblowing system without a culture shift, where speaking out about potential wrongdoing is an accepted part of public sector culture, and where this can be supported and responded to in a climate free from fear and reprisal. I mean, he raised the alarm, Mr. Warnick, last year that Canadian bureaucrats will never routinely speak up about wrongdoing in the federal government until a deeply rooted culture of anxiety over whistleblowing is eliminated. I mean, that's the beginning point, and I don't know whether or not the Auditor General is actually out too far on a limb when he brings that up in the context of decision making around Phoenix. So that being said, I know that you've put mental health in your mandate letters for your deputies, and I think that's commendable, and I think it's very good that people have to look after their workers within their own departments. I'm wondering whether or not there's room for you going forward to somehow deal with an issue that is apparent to other people who monitor the public sector, but maybe not as accepted at the higher levels that you work in.
Sorry, what issue was that? What was the question? What issue?
I'm wondering what is your plan going forward on dealing with the issue of culture, now that it's not only the Auditor General, but it's also, previous to that, the Public Service Integrity Commissioner, who has raised questions about culture, and we're receiving commentary from individuals within the service. I've received commentary from individuals within the service. I mean, that's our role as an MP. We get that happening. Do you have a plan to deal with it going forward? Not admitting to the fact that there's a problem, but admitting to the fact that there's discussion about a problem, and therefore that should bring something in terms of moving forward.
Yes, and I commend you to my report and all the speeches I've given on this topic. We definitely have to move on the culture. I would recommend the committee look at the incentive and disincentive structure within which people operate. I go back to my opening remarks. If the diagnosis is wrong, you will prescribe remedies that could do great damage. You alluded, Mr. Chair, to rapid turnover of deputy ministers. The facts speak otherwise. I have the evidence for that. The Auditor General left an impression which is factually incorrect, and you can correct that with evidence. The way to measure deputy minister tenure is how many years were they in the job from start to finish. So if you look at the 33 deputy ministers that I have some influence over and the last 3 terms that they completed, not the snapshot of the ones that are in now and haven't run out their clock, that's 99 deputy terms, okay? 33 ministers, completed terms, and 3. So 49 of those were more than 3 years, which is the benchmark this committee suggested in previous reports. 27 were in their jobs for more than 4 years, and 16 were in their jobs for more than 5 years. The median and the average are both greater than 3 years. So my view is we don't have a pervasive, generalized problem with deputy turnover. They have the cumulative experience of, on average, about 20 years of experience as an executive in some form or another. I have worked hard to bring in other skill sets and talents. I've hired 2 provincial cabinet secretaries. We brought in the chief of defense staff as a deputy minister, and we brought in people that have been private sector CEOs and have run think tanks. So we are always trying to improve the leadership cadre that runs the public service. I mean, officers of Parliament have their role and have their opinion, but they are outside observers. The important thing for Canadians to understand is all of these were designed to ensure that Canada is well governed. And all in, Canada's public service is free of nepotism, free of corruption, and free of partisanship. Now, there will be errors and exceptions to that, but they're detected and corrected and remedied. So it's important in this day and age that Canadians have some confidence in their public institutions, and I am committed to making them better as we go along. We have an annual survey now. The letters and the emails from constituents are an important feedback loop. I understand that, but they are the people that are motivated to write to you. So we have tried to go to an annual comprehensive survey, and I've published the results of that, not all of which are flattering, in my annual report, and it's on the internet.
Thank you, Mr. Warnick. Mr. Area, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I have lived and worked in several countries. One thing I should say that we have one of the best public service in the world. I know there is no corruption. Public service employees here are very well qualified. And as Mr. Warnick mentioned, yes, sometimes mistakes do happen. With 270,000 employees and 6,500 executives, mistakes do happen. We take it, and corrective action needs to be taken. It has been taken. Mr. Warnick, I have a question in terms of the decision making. What level, what decisions are made? On Phoenix, IBM was appointed to develop and implement. In 2012, IBM said Phoenix would cost $274 million to build and implement. But the Treasury Board had approved only $155 million in 2009. If anybody asks me if we can trace back the problems of Phoenix to one single major factor, that is this, that IBM said it requires $274 million, but the budget available was $155 million. But the decision was made to go ahead with the same budget. I would like to know what level is it at the Phoenix executives level or the associate deputy ministers level or the deputy minister level, what level the decision was made to go with this low budget?
The budgets of departments and projects and initiatives are set by the Treasury Board, which is a committee of ministers. It's established under the Financial Administration Act, and any new resources flowing to a department or any major projects are approved by Treasury Board. It is the government's management board. So
I'm
that's
sorry,
when
I
the
got
budget
very
would.
limited time.
And then the officials are expected to work within that budget and to deliver with that. And as I said earlier, they have no mechanism to ask for more resources if their minister will not go back to Treasury Board.
So, do you think that the deputy minister did not approach the minister, or the deputy minister approached the minister stating the fact that this budget is just equal to about 55% of the requirement, and should it proceed?
I don't know the specifics, but I think the context is not presented to you by the Auditor General. If I understand the report, and you can ask Mr. Ferguson about that, there was a window in the fall of 2012 or maybe 2013 when Treasury Board established the budget for the project where it could have been resourced differently. And that seems to be his suggestion, that somebody could have asked for more resources at the time. My point is that was really a decision for the minister to approach Treasury Board ministers and Treasury Board ministers to make, obviously on the advice of officials, and I don't know specifically what the advice was. But I would remind you that at the end of March of 2012, the government delivered its deficit reduction action plan budget and announced its intention to lay off 19,500 public servants. It would have been a very brave minister who asked for new resources in the fall of 2012.
So it is possible that the minister in charge in 2012 declined to go to Treasury Board to ask for the additional funding that is required to build and implement this Phoenix system in full. Because of that one single wrong decision by the minister, we have got this problem today.
I don't know what the considerations were at the time, and I'm certainly, my job, as I said earlier, is to protect cabinet confidences. You can ask the ministers and the deputies at the time. My view on the pay system, as I said earlier, is you will not find a single decision point or a single explanatory factor. It is a compounding of many issues. The resourcing issue seems to have been set in 2012, and all of the incentive structure, which maybe I'm not getting across, the incentive structure within which officials were expected is that's your budget, deliver the project.
You talked about multiple layers of oversight. Auditor General specifically mentions oversight, I think, 3 or 4 different places. To put in one nutshell, he said that Phoenix was an incomprehensible failure of project management and oversight. You say there is multiple layers of oversight, whereas Auditor General says there was no oversight in Phoenix build and implementation. Where do you think the difference is?
I think clearly there was not effective oversight. There was lots of oversight. There were many, and he sets that out in the report. So there was a breakdown in the oversight, not a lack of oversight. And I've tried to convey to you all the kinds of channels of feedback and oversight under which a department or a deputy head operates. So.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick. Ms. Wright, and then Ms. Yip.
Thanks. Mr. Wernick, with respect to the government's position on the AG's report, the Treasury Board President indicated that his response to it is that the department will ensure independent reviews are conducted on all such projects in the future, and that deputy ministers and senior executives responsible for them are made aware of the findings. And he acknowledges that there is questions about the culture change, and he says some of this needed culture change is simply a matter of unleashing the creativity, energy, enthusiasm of Canada's world-class public service. And he cautioned that making such a shift would not happen overnight. But he is agreeing with the AG that there is a needed culture change. Now, at the very beginning, Mr. Wernick, you indicated that you thought it was the analysis of the AG was not based on, it didn't have enough evidence to make it, and overstated. I can't remember your exact words. If you could tell me your exact words again, that would be really helpful. But does what the minister say and what you're telling the committee today, do those two things line up?
I'm in complete agreement with Minister Bryson that we need to improve the culture of the public service and promote innovation and creativity, and there are specific ways to do that, and there are specific remedies which this committee could recommend. I'm not saying we don't have a culture problem. We are risk averse. We are bureaucratic. We do tend to cling to process. We do tend to cling to rules. I've talked about this many, many times, and there are ways that we can change the incentives and the disincentives to be more nimble and more risk-taking and more agile, while being extremely responsible for the stewardship of public resources.
Do you think it's appropriate to have an independent review of the culture within the federal public service?
I'm always open to advice. The Prime Minister Harper had an advisory committee on the public service. I commend to you Dominic Barton. I commend to you Michael Sabia, who's run large private corporations and also worked in the public sector. I think it's reasonable for parliamentarians who care about the public service to go and look for advice. I do not agree with the idea of a commission of inquiry, which is entirely looking backwards and forensic and looking for who did what when. If you want to take a serious look at the public service and how to improve it, I'm all in.
Okay. And Mr. Wernick, you in trying to get to the bottom of what happened with Phoenix, you wrote all your deputies and you asked them to write you back and tell you specifically what was going on in each department, and you published them on your website. Is that something you would entertain with respect to the culture, for the deputies to analyze the culture in their each department so that all Canadians can understand what the public sector is talking about, so that they aren't tarred with Chapter 0 of the Auditor General's report?
Yeah, I mean, just to be very clear as the governance point, and I don't want to sort of get too bogged down in this, I do not have any executive authority to tell a deputy minister or any public servant outside a Privy Council office what to do. I do recommend promotion and movement and performance pay to the Prime Minister, and I'm able to do that through an annual cycle of agreements on what their goals are, and we review their performance, and on that basis I recommend performance pay, and I take full responsibility for advising the Prime Minister on the deployment of deputies and whether they stay or whether they move. So those commitments do have leverage, and I've used them in specific areas like mental health and others. I don't know how exactly you measure organizational culture, what they would report back with. On the pay system, I think it was important to make clear to Canadians that departments were taking pay seriously on things that they had some control over, training, emergency pay and relief. These were things that they could make some strides on in their own department. And so I asked everybody to write in and say what they were doing, and I told them in advance that we would put them all on the internet so that Canadians, including parliamentarians, could take a look at that. That's a technique which we can use. The best way to get at culture, I think, and I'll defer to expertise on that, is it's a different methodology. You have to do surveys, you have to do deep dives, and I just don't think you should be lured into making general statements that there is a culture across 300 organizations and all of its subunits spread across all of the geographic locations. There are some very strong and healthy organizational cultures, and there are some very troubled ones. And the art is going to be knowing which is which, and to have the right incentives and feedback loops to correct the ones that need correcting, and to emulate and copy the ones that are strong.
Well, I guess thank you for saying that you take advice, you take suggestions. My suggestion would be that, number one, you can determine what the culture is in each sub-department, and you can ask a deputy minister to quantify, clarify, and report to you what it is. Specifically, if you have two outside, independent officials telling you that there seems to be a culture issue, and members of parliament around this table telling you that there seems to be a culture issue. So I would hope that you listen to the advice that the committee is given, or at least members of the committee are giving, with respect to getting your hands around this issue, because I do think it is a very serious one.
Thank you, Ms. Raitt. We'll now move to Ms. Yip.
Thank you for coming. In your view, are there enough consequences for poor performance in the public service, and what can be done about it?
No, there are not.
So,
And what can be done about it, sir?
Okay. It's a big topic and one which you might want to spend some time on. Senior leadership positions basically fall into two categories. There are the heads of Crown corporations and specialized agencies, officers of Parliament, and so on. They tend to have fixed terms, employment contracts, and the sort of, severance clauses and all the sort of disciplines that go with that. Deputy ministers, in the sense of the ministers who run departments and are close to ministers, have no job security. They do not have formal employment contracts, and they have no entitlement to severance. So they operate with totally precarious employment. Now, below the level of deputy ministers, if you're covered by the Public Service Employment Act, then you have very strong job security, and you can only be terminated for cause, which is a legal test. And it is extremely difficult to fire people in the public service for poor conduct or poor performance.
So there's nothing at all we can make it easier to...
You'd have to change the employment law, and that would be a matter which the public service unions would have strong views on.
Okay. If there was one thing you could fix about the public service for the future, what would it be?
I think the time is right, maybe after the next election, not in the last year of a parliament, for a structural change to the public service. I think, and this is a terrible metaphor I was advised not to use, that we have made a lot of progress under successive governments on openness and transparency, opening government to Canadians. So, and these are decisions built up over the years with a lot of pressure from this committee and from others. So this is the bucket I would call glasnost, the openness. We have all grants and contributions are on the internet. All contracts are on the internet. All travel and hospitality is on the internet. Every single performance measure used by every department is on the internet. And we've moved forward in strengthening the role of the Parliamentary Budget Office, the Chief Information Officer. We've strengthened the role of the Chief Statistician. This government has worked hard on open government, although it was something that Minister Clement pursued in the previous government, which is why we rank #2 on open government in the world. We have something called GC InfoBase, which makes all kinds of data available to you and to other Canadians, which is just getting better and better, and so on. So, and you know, we have made some movement on cabinet confidences and access and that sort of thing. So I think in opening government, we've made an enormous amount of progress. In the basic structures of government are those of the 1980s. And so we have to look at layers. We have to look at occupational groups and categories, how work is organized. That is not going to be an easy task. It's largely a matter of collective bargaining, and it's not going to be easy to change. But I do think it would be worth it. I don't expect to be around to see the end of that process, but I do encourage you to take a serious look at it.
Thank you, Ms. Yeah, no? You do. Yeah, okay. You have another minute.
Do you think the public service has done enough to embrace digital technologies to streamline the processes?
I think there are enthusiasts and there are resistors, as there are in life out there. I commend Minister Bryson for creating the Canadian Digital Service. My report gives lots of examples of moving things to digital platforms successfully. You probably haven't heard about them because they were on time and on budget and fully functioned. So the airport kiosks that are delivered by the Border Services Agency, the electronic travel authorizations that allow people to apply for alternatives to visas, the installation of Environment Canada's supercomputer, the replacement of the mainframe underneath the employment insurance system, which was completely replaced without dropping a day of work. Those are technology success stories, and you probably haven't heard of them. It's not a complaint. Your eyes are drawn through the feedback loops to the things that didn't work as well. So there is a lot of opportunity to move government services to smartphones and the way that Canadians want to get services, and we're very good at the external services. I would argue we are one of the best public services in the world at serving Canadians in the way they want to be served. 80% of the interactions of Canadians with their government are now on the internet. About 20% are on by phone, and maybe the rest are walk-in services. We're good at digital government services. We are not good at internal services like pay, finance, and other things. What we do to each other as public servants needs the same hacking and same digital approach, and I'm very happy that Minister Bryson wants to take that on in the specific area of the pay system.
Thank you, Ms. Yip. Thank you. Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Chair. In turning our minds to where do we go from here, my fellow Vice Chair and friend, Madame Mendez, has come up with a course of action that certainly I can support, and I've had a chance to talk to Conservative colleagues, and if we get enough support, I would suggest that it's a good path forward in terms of next steps for the committee, and I don't want to steal her thunder, so with your permission, Chair, through you, I would offer my time to Madame Mendez to put the issue in front of the committee with her recommendation.
So that's fine. Is this the committee business portion that you want?
It would have been.
Because there may still be some more questions, but it's in order to have a question if it's related to this, or a motion. If it's related to this, it's in order. I haven't seen the motion, but please take some time and
please give me a bit of leniency. I just wrote it, okay, so this is somewhat drafty. That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts invite the Auditor General for a further meeting of 1 hour on the message on the 14th of June 2018, and that we give instructions to the analysts on the committee's report on the AG's Chapter 0, and this would be in camera. And that would obviously, well, the instructions for a committee, I mean, we have to do that in camera.
Okay.
And that we then cancel the invitation to Deputy Minister for Thursday for the.
Mr. Christofferson.
Yeah, just to be clear, because these things are happening in real time, if you will. I think in fairness, we should invite the AG for up to the same length of time that we had the clerk here today.
He's already come on his message.
But not in response to what we heard here, and we don't have an easy issue in front of it. I didn't want to limit to the AG to an hour. If we can do it an hour, fine. I don't want to stay longer than anybody else.
So this Thursday, we have already invited and received the acceptance from the Phoenix minister to come, and I would remind, or not the minister, the deputy minister, and I would remind the committee that we have also stated very clearly in the past that we wanted to have them here before the break in the summer.
Well, what we stated very clearly is that we wanted to have the previous deputy ministers, which are coming, I believe, on the 19th.
No, they are not.
Oh, okay, that's
There's
changed.
some in Europe, there's some in all around, there's some not even in Canada right now, so they're unavailable.
But I think more importantly than specific chapters right now, dealing with the message of the Auditor General, and this is what I brought, is that we have to deal with the message of the Auditor General, and this is why we have Mr. Wernick here today. We are dealing with that chapter, that famous Chapter 0 that you don't like, but that is the name of the chapter. So if we want to do this in the proper way before we even go into the detailed chapters of each department, this is, in my view, in our view, what we should do, is to bring forth the completion of this chapter.
So, Madam Mendez, let me just be we have an opening on the 19th.
Mm-hmm. Well, apparently now, yes.
So we do have an opening where we could invite the Auditor General on the 19th and keep our schedule that we've already accepted intact, rather than tell Phoenix, no, you aren't needed. I think it's timely that we have Phoenix. I think my constituents who, when I did town hall meetings, they want answers from Phoenix, and we said that we wanted those answers before summer, and that's why we invited them. They're able to come, but we do have an opening on the 19th where we could have the Auditor General.
Well, my point about Phoenix, and I've made this point before, this is not something new. We've had the current Deputy Minister. She cannot enlighten us on the chapter that the Auditor General brought to us. This is about previous decisions, not about what's happening now or the future.
We have had the current Deputy Minister dealing with Phoenix here on a previous chapter from the Auditor General.
Exactly.
Not from this.
Precisely. But she came on the chapter that concerns her mandate, meaning the launch and after, and what corrective measures she's putting forward. It's not about what happened before, which is the chapter that this current report is about.
Okay.
I mean, am I missing something? Isn't this what it was all about? The report this time, on the underlying issues that led to the failure of Phoenix.
Yes, that's exactly it. What is the underlying issues that led to Phoenix?
So this is not
and dealing with this chapter as well. In fact, the Auditor General, I think most of what he says in this report is concerning Phoenix. So I have Mr. McCauley and I think Mr. Christofferson. Yeah. Mr. McCauley.
Just briefly, she was there before the second rollout. She should also, I would assume, at that level have done some research into what happened beforehand and can perhaps answer to some of the questions. But also I think with the cultural issues that the AG was referring to also does cover some of the issues of why it's taken 2 years to perhaps stabilize it. And this is not a Tory grit type thing, but the culture of the executives that led to it still being an issue 2 years later.
Mr. Okay, I'm sorry. Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I've been away. I'm just catching up. Can I ask what the work plan is currently for the 14th, 19th, and 21st?
So the 14th currently is calling the Phoenix Deputy Minister, or the Minister of the Department dealing with Phoenix, here on the 14th. On the 19th, we were inviting and hoping to invite former deputy ministers, of whom we found out are unavailable, not even in the country. And I think on the 21st we have no meeting.
Just in case.
But right now, currently, we do not have anything on the 19th.
Right. So we run the risk that if we don't have the deputy on the 14th, that we can't necessarily have them on the 19th, therefore we might not have them.
That's right.
Well, for what it's worth, and again, I wasn't here in the earlier days, so I'm not being, may sound like it, but I'm not being as pushy as I usually am in terms of my opinion. I could live with us going ahead with the Phoenix chapter, just because we shouldn't lose it, and I think your points are well taken, Chair. There are a lot of people in the public. This affects a lot of people. They don't want us pushing that off, and so I don't think we lose a lot. My preference would be to make the switch, and maybe we could ask the deputy if they could help us out and make that switch, and that would allow us to have the best process, which is immediately following the clerk, and we do thank you for being here today, sir, that immediately after that we'd have the AG to respond. That would be ideal, but given the importance, Chair, especially as the way you framed it, if we can't get them here for the 19th, then I would suggest maybe we'd be okay to stay with the 14th, but let's be sure we can get the...
We are not certain that the AG, let me just remind you, we are not certain that the AG is available on the 14th. So it doesn't always work where we phone the AG and say, be here. I mean, we work around his schedule as well. So that's part of what the problem of scheduling some of these meetings are. There's other days that we were going to have Phoenix on the 7th, but because of the provincial election, we decided that we wanted it before the break of summer. We wouldn't do it on the 7th. We would do it on the 14th. They've accepted that. The AG... we do not know he's available on the 14th.
Absolutely, I agree. But point of clarification, what we were, the people we were inviting on the 19th were the former deputy ministers. It has nothing to do with the current.
Clear the 19th and put the AG in there, assuming the AG is available.
On the 14th.
No.
All right, I have Mr. Massé.
Merci,
I'm sorry. I'll come back.
Yeah. Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to have this discussion after the visit of Mr. Warnick, because, yes, it's important for us to continue the discussion, but I just wanted to clarify. For us, our objective in terms of examining the Phoenix report had to involve deputy ministers and their delegates, because this report covers challenges that were identified prior to the launch of Phoenix. If we only have the deputy minister on the 14th, the current deputy minister of PSPC, that's not our objective that we wanted. We wanted to have access to the deputy ministers at the time to discuss the challenges at the time that were identified in the report.
Unlikely to have 3 deputy ministers, some of whom are not even in fact, I'm not sure any of them are still in the public service. So one of them is, I guess. But it's highly unlikely that we would have them with the current DM. All right? So the department and the current DM would typically show up. I have never yet seen where we've hauled in DMs from 6 years and had them all at the same table.
It's a special case.
And Mr. Massé, I'll also say that we have not heard that they are unwilling to come, but it may be in the fall.
No, I see what you mean. Obviously, this is a special case. This is an important report on an important project that had important challenges still, and we would like to have these people, being witness to our...
Absolutely. Mr. Christopherson.
Well, I still haven't heard anything that suggests we can't do what Madame Mendez has suggested. If the deputy minister on the 14th wants to score some brownie points, help us out and move to the 19th if they can. But if not, my suggestion was let's stay with that meeting, but on the 19th, set aside the idea of the previous ministers and let's get the AG in. That way, when we rise, assuming we don't rise before the 22nd, which is not likely given current mood in the House, that means we could still go ahead, have the meeting with the on Phoenix on Thursday, and then the following Tuesday, the 19th, hopefully the AG is available. And if the AG is not available, that's a problem. And it may be we just can't get the AG in before the summer break. It would be a shame. Maybe we could hold a special time that we could agree on that would meet that need to tuck it in. But wiping out the 14th with the Deputy Minister of Phoenix to have the AG come in, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. If they can voluntarily move and accommodate the AG for the 14th, everything's perfect. If not, let's go with Phoenix and hope that the AG is available on the 19th, and I would just leave because we're running out of time. If we can't do it on the 19th, is there any way we can find an hour and 15 minutes between then to hold that one session with the AG so our staff can be working on the report over the summer? But it's still fluid, Chair.
Okay, I have Mr. Area, Mr. McCauley, and Ms. Mendez.
Mr. Chair, I have to disagree with my colleagues on this side of the table. I think the Deputy Minister, current Deputy Minister availability is very important for this committee. She may not be the person involved in the Phoenix development that was covered by the Auditor General's report, but the acceptance of the Auditor General recommendation is done by the current Deputy Minister, and implementation of the recommendations of the Auditor General will be done by this current Deputy Minister, so we need her to be here.
I think that's exactly what our analyst just told me as well, so you're correct, Mr. Area. Now, I had Mr. Area.
Yeah, just briefly, that's exactly the point I was going to make, Mr. Area. Thank you. She is responsible for that, but she's also responsible, if we are to believe there is a culture issue, she is responsible for that culture change in that department that is responsible for this to begin with. So it'd be wonderful to hear about that issue as well.
Thank you. And now to Ms. Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's a question of timeline. We know for a fact we will not be finishing Phoenix before we rise. If the former deputy ministers are not available on the 19th, we won't finish before we rise. So, really, what's the rush? Why don't we do Chapter 0, which I believe is the whole point of the reports of the Auditor General this spring, or the most important ones, and deal with that, finish that, try to get a report going on the 14th. Because on the 19th, we know we can't get the former deputy ministers. But if we only do the Auditor General on the 19th, we won't have time to give instructions to ALSI or even get a draft of a report before we rise. Because there won't be time.
Well, we'll hold the hearing.
Okay,
we give
just one. We won't be able to prove it. So I'm going to ask Mr. Wernick, has his hand in the air, or he did. Or were you asking if you could leave, sir?
No. I volunteer to stay as long as you want. I was just wondering whether I get a chance to make a very, very brief closing statement.
Yes, you will.
Thank you.
Mr. Christofferson?
I rarely disagree with my colleague on process, and I appreciate that she's provided the framework for this. But I think if we can go with the 14th with the deputy minister, we should, unless they can make the move to the 19th, opening up the 14th for the AG. That would be perfect. Then it would be Mr. Wernick, followed by the AG, directions to our staff, and then on to the meeting with the Phoenix minister. So, Chair, if I could just finish.
Yes, finish, please.
Thank you. So, ideally, in a perfect world, the minister coming in on the 14th would voluntarily agree to come the 19th, and the AG would be available on the 14th. If that can't happen, then hopefully it will be the Phoenix deputy on the 14th and the AG on the 19th. The fly in the ointment is if the AG can't do either the 14th or the 19th, but that's about as far as we can go planning today.
I am just being told from our clerk that on the 14th we have already received affirmation that the Deputy Minister of Phoenix is coming, together with the Secretary of the Treasury Board, who is planning on being here on the 14th.
Give us an idea if the the AG would be available.
Well, and the AG will be there as well, so he would be available.
So that means he is available
He would
on the
be
14th.
available. So I mean, we're then rescinding our invitation to two.
Changing it to the 19th?
Well, and the will of the committee at the initially was that we definitely wanted to have Phoenix before the break.
But we won't, because we don't have the former deputy ministers. We won't have it.
No. Initially we wanted the deputy minister of Phoenix, the one, as Mr. McCauley said, who will be dealing with the culture.
We also added the clerk of the Privy Council. We also added the former deputy minister. I mean, it's not a static wish of the committee. We've been evolving in this. This has not been a one and once done, like you say,
One and done.
one and done. It has been an evolving discussion since we've had the reports tabled. So for me, it's a logical step. You deal with the message, which is chapter 0, and then you go to the other chapters. That's my...
Thank you. Yes, but I have Mr. Massey first.
And we have Mr. Wernick who wants to have a closing statement. Yes.
So what Mr. Christofferson has proposed in terms of steps, for me, is fully acceptable. So we see if we can postpone the Deputy Minister and Treasury Board Secretariat to the 19th. That's the option 1. And if it doesn't work, then we can go back to option 2 on the 14th. But, my preference would be to go with the process that Mr. Christofferson has put forward. It's fair and it's reasonable.
Thank you. Did I have someone else on the speaker's list after Mr. Massey? Okay, yeah, you can come back and move a motion. Well, no, you cannot, because we have already had a motion moved. Is that correct? That's correct. So we have already a motion on the floor. So
can I have a recorded vote, Mr. Chair?
So we have. So the motion could be amended, but we have a motion on the floor, so I cannot take another motion.
Please.
I'm going to ask our. Yes.
Can you modify it? See if we can do it in one.
Bless you.
So, Madam Mendez, are you moving the same motion?
Yes.
All right.
That the Standing Committee on Public Accounts invite the Auditor General for a further meeting of 1 hour on the message or Chapter 0 on June 14, 2018, and that we give instructions to the analysts on the committee's report on the AG's Chapter 0. In camera, this part. Yes.
So there is nothing in that motion in regard to what Mr. Christofferson, is that what you meant?
Well, you also still have the 1 hour in there as opposed to equal time. But more importantly, surely we can find a meeting of the minds. Ideally, the 14th with the AG is the right thing to do. But I think the current thinking is as long as we can merely postpone, to use Mr. Massey's word, from the 14th to the 19th, what we currently have scheduled. And if that could happen, then if the AG is available on the 14th, that gives us the perfect timeline. If not, Plan B would be that we stay with the deputies on the 14th and invite the AG for the 19th.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, you take that as
this that now becomes something we're going to have to look at more involved in a committee business time. And I've given my word to Mr. Wernick that he's going to have a closing statement. So can we defer the vote to immediately following this meeting?
Mr. Wernick's finished talking. I'm prepared to give him that. He gave it to us.
All right.
So let's do our business and then hear from Mr. Wernick.
Are we ready for the question?
Well, I don't know.
Well, this is my point.
We're still all over the map. I mean, what the motion is and what I described are somewhat different.
Okay. What I understood from you, Mr. Christofferson, if I understood correctly, is that we should give the same amount of time to the Auditor General as we did to Mr. Wernick.
Yeah, I think so.
I have no issue with that, and if we finish earlier, then we can give instructions to the analysts. That's fine with me. So perhaps just...
So that's a minor amendment?
The amendment would be to take the 1 hour part from my motion.
Okay. And then what about the order of the meetings, Madame?
Oh, no, absolutely. Transfer the meetings from...
So you're...
Mine is on the June 14th. I am
call the question here. And,
well, what the question is,
Mr. Chair.
The question is that
That we invite him for the 14th.
Yes.
And we know he is available because he's coming
For the 2 hours,
minister.
though.
If I may, Chair, that's assuming that the deputy currently scheduled for the 14th can make the 19th. If not, then we stay with the deputy on the 14th and hope the AG can make the 19th.
That would be a separate motion, because this motion does not refer at all to the other. I got a feeling what we're seeing is pushing the DM out of the 14th, and I have heard nothing from the government in regards to inviting them here on the 19th yet. So that would be...
Well, no, because we thought we had the other DMs.
Yeah, well, we don't.
We just found out no, but that's what we had heard.
So, we don't have anyone else
You're
scheduled
pushing us
on the
into a
19th.
no vote. We don't have a meeting of the minds. If we vote, we're going to divide. We haven't reached agreement yet.
There is no consensus.
That's
why
right.
I've already been...
And that's why
Ms.
I
Wraith has asked
keep this
for
going.
a
We're not
recorded
there
vote.
yet.
But why have we
What
not
we say,
consensus?
Mr. Massey, what Mr. Massey and I are saying is not reflected in the motion. Mr. Massey, maybe you can help.
Just a question. Maybe I'm confused, but on the 19th, can we get the list of deputy minister and associate that we've asked if we can have 1, 2, or 3? So you're saying no, so we can't have anybody.
None of them are available on the 19th.
Or haven't responded.
What you would like to see is that on the 19th we have the current deputy minister and the Auditor General and the Secretary of the Treasury Board.
That's currently scheduled for the 14th, be
that
moved to the
moves
19th, and the AG come on the 14th.
I have no
And if
issues
either
with
one
that.
can't do it, Plan B would be stay with the deputy on the 14th and invite the AG for the 19th.
Is that all right? I'm seeing the affirmative or the question. Mr. Area?
It's 5:30.
All right, we're going to call the question. I am moving with the consensus. Let me just be very clear on what I'm hearing. Okay? I hear a motion that has stated that we shuffle or move the 14th meeting and that we invite the Auditor General alone on the 14th. But I hear not quite a consensus, but a desire to have Phoenix on the 19th. And that's yes in the affirmative. All right, so then we will call, then what we will do is we will vote only on the motion because she was unwilling to amend the motion to include...
Nobody proposed an amendment per se. We were just having discussions. But if you want to amend it, I have no issues with the amendment.
Then I would be open to your amendment if there is an availability of the 19th.
Well, I think we can make it as one vote. I don't think there's disagreement, colleagues, with what you just stated as the first part.
Exactly.
And so the second part is, if that can't be accommodated, then Plan B would be to leave the scheduled 14th and the hope that the AG can come on the 19th.
I think we're all right then. I think we're okay.
There,
I don't even think we have to have a vote. I see consensus pretty well from all of us. So that's a big difference. Now, Mr. Wernick, this is not normally, this is the way they go, and sometimes we are moved by the testimony that we have to a place where we reshuffle our schedule to have the Auditor General again appear, and that invitation will be given. But you have a closing statement, and I'm going to close with your statement. That will be pretty well the end of the meeting, but I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for being open and frank. There's some questions we haven't got answered yet that maybe weren't even asked, but we will have other deputy ministers coming that we will ask those questions to. And so we welcome you on your closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I promise not to drag this on too long. I just wanted to get a couple of things across or on the record. First of all, I mean, I'd want to thank the committee for the kind words about the public service, but also for your interest. I think there's a genuine interest around this table in making Canada's governance better, and you play a very important role in that. I acknowledge that, and I actually welcome the opportunity to have exchanges with you, and I will come back as often and any time you want if you want to pursue the issues around how to make an excellent public service even better. I would commend to you to pay attention to the issues of incentives and disincentives within which people operate. I think that is the key. I also, I just want to be very clear because you know, things get quoted and put onto videos and spread around. There was testimony of a public servant put into an attack ad last week, which troubles me. So I want to be very clear and on the record. I am not saying the public service culture is perfect. I've said on many, many occasions it can be approved that we are risk averse, we are process and rules driven, we need to be more nimble, we need to be more creative, we need to be more assertive. What I take issue with is the insinuation that it is a generalized broken culture, which implies a generalized broken public service, and I have to contest that. The picture of the public service that comes out from these kinds of exchanges and commentary and experts and media and otherwise sends the public service mixed signals. We're told that we're intransigent and uncooperative, but we're also told we're too obedient to our ministers. You get the Sir Humphrey caricature of the puppet master who's manipulating ministers and running the town, and then we're told that we're too compliant and puppets of the political side and PMO. We're told that we're careless with public money and building empires without regard to costs. And then we're told that we're overzealous in staying on budget and too timid in asking for new resources. It's a confusing set of signals that the public service receives. It's kind of Schrodinger's public service, like what happens when you open the box. I was told not to use that line, but yeah, thank you, Mr. Christopherson. So, I mean, my advice is where I started, which is be very careful on the diagnosis before you start prescribing remedies. And I think that you can be led into mistaken diagnoses very easily. There are a lot of governance quacks out there, and I think it's important to listen carefully to people with some expertise in governance and running organizations and organizational culture and behavior, and apply them to the public service context. And you have my full cooperation and commitment to work with you on that. Last point is about the role of this committee. You play a hugely important role in the feedback loop to a better public service. And I would encourage you to create a culture at this committee where it is possible to disagree with the Auditor General, to challenge the analysis, to challenge the conclusions and the opinions. Because we have been trained over a decade or more that the only acceptable response to an Auditor General chapter is, we agree. And then you play with the margins of we agree but, and try to get some other issue in. It should be okay to challenge the analysis and the findings of the Auditor General. It will make for a healthier, richer debate and a much better sense of solutions and so on. So I hope that I'm not in too much trouble for disagreeing with the findings of the Auditor General. I don't think it was an incomprehensible failure. I think it was comprehensible, and I don't think we have a broken culture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wernick. And just one quick thing, because in your closing comment, but there is this misunderstanding, I think sometimes that much of what you've discussed is what we deal with here, and it isn't. There is government ops, there's a government operations committee, as you know, that is responsible for much of that. What we are responsible predominantly is to review the Auditor General's reports and to then work with the deputy ministers to see action plans. And I will also just add, in regard to us, whether or not we always agree with the Auditor General, I have as yet seen very few deputy ministers that have ever disagreed with the Auditor General. And so I think it works both ways. So in a way, we thank you for your appearance here today, and we are now adjourned.